I'm Shanon Squires. I've been in Bitcoin mining since 2017, early 2017. Went down a similar rabbit hole. You kind of learn about Bitcoin, you learn about Bitcoin mining, and then it's just that's what you do after that. Regardless of what you did before, you just go all the way down. So, been doing it for a little while. Tried to develop some mining farms here in Colorado. Stranded natural gas in the early days. From there, failed horribly the first time. Failed again the second time. It's much more difficult than anybody thinks it is. But along the way, I got some great mentors, learned a lot about building power plants, and then from learning how to build power plants, you progress into learning how to build Bitcoin mining farms. It's actually a really similar process when you get down to building large-scale farms. It's very similar to building a power plant. And as like you mentioned, it's just the inverse of a power plant anyways. So along that path, I put on some conferences with people, brokered a lot of miners, brokered a lot of hosting, ended up working for Canaan for a period of time, and then ended up doing a little bit of contracting with Marathon, and then finally landed at Compass about a year ago. I tried to avoid it as long as I could, but it was just too appealing. Great group of people. Compass has run into every possible pitfall that there is in Bitcoin mining. If there's a pitfall that can exist, Compass has hit it and they've worked through it and they're still here, so it's kind of exciting. And so it's a good team that I've joined. But at this point, you guys feel free to ask any questions. You guys can cover topics that these guys talked about. I probably know more than I should about some of their farms as well. And it's great to meet you in person, other than just Twitter, so that's awesome. Okay, Tatum, you go first.
Oh boy. That's a real question. All right, say I own a house. I only have 110 volt. How much money and effort will it take to get 240 volt if I want to do home mining?
You don't have 110 volt. You have single phase power.
Okay, I tried my hardest.
In your breaker panel,
You taught me everything. This is on you, actually.
there's going to be 2 bars that run down inside it. And as long as your breaker touches both poles, you now have 220. And
Okay, so say I don't know shit about that. How do I do that?
you call an electrician, or you go to Home Depot, and you find a brand of breaker. You guys don't do this on your own. Find a brand of breaker that matches the brand that's in there, that has a single breaker and 2 holes and says 20 amps on it. And then you Google the wire size you need to come out of that. You're going to open it up. Don't shock yourself. Install the wire, put the breaker, and then you got the wire there. Then you just got to put it at the end of the PDU or the outlet. For home miners, probably easier to do Chinese outlets. They have them at like Ace Hardware's occasionally. Much easier that way.
So how much does it cost to
Make sure your wheel is updated before you try it.
Yeah. The reality is, you can grab, if you call an electrician to come out to your house and give you a quote, running a single circuit is, depending on the electrician, is going to cost, and how far the run is going to cost you anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s.
Actually, on that point, who knows an electrician who would take BTC to run some wires in your house? Really? I was like, that's amazing.
I'll have one by the end of the week. I'll take one by the As soon as Ryan gets back in town, I'll take him to meet my electrician and we're good to go.
I know a guy who's been in crypto forever. And, he'll do it. So.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
I'll post in the group.
Could you talk about the different payout strategies for if I'm a miner and I join Brains or Linkcoin?
I was like, I could do too.
How do I get paid out per hash?
So there actually used to be, back in the day, you'd solo mine, and then there became too many miners, and nobody solo mines unless it's a little at-home thing or you're trying to play the lotto. Everybody pool mines. Like Brains, first pool, and then you had a bunch of other pools, and now there's a handful of pools out there. And they used to have a bunch of different models, like paper share, paper last known share, and a handful of different ones. They've all pretty much consolidated the same model now, which is just, essentially you're aggregating all the hash rate based on the amount of work you're putting in. You're getting a pro rata share of the Bitcoin earned by the pool. And that's probably the easiest way to explain it without diving into each of the different ones. And since there's only one that really exists anymore, and the companies who did other ones all stopped because they eventually got to the point where they couldn't pay anything out. They're all gone. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess.
I don't know how detailed you want me to dig in.
You can opine on, so Brains, I don't get paid out unless they find a block. Linkcoin, if I'm hashing, whether or not they find a block, I'm not totally sure how they issue their hash. I get paid at any point if I join any hash.
Yeah, so PPLNS versus one of the things that's interesting about Lingcoin is they're actually just partnering with a larger pool to be able to do that in the first place. But yeah, so Brains is the only one that's still different. The rest of them are going to be paid by that. And as far as that goes, I'm completely honest, I haven't dug into that in like 2 years. So I can't run through the details of each one of them. But yeah, Brains is the only one that's still running off of
Is that
paid per last. No, I don't remember what it's called anymore. But a Brains actually also, do you know what?
Well, yeah, typically they just like
You got it.
They can spot and have to hold it for a little bit, so it's like balance the balance sheet, which can like, correct you if you're getting incorrect. But if you're a bigger miner, like probably okay. But I think you might have a.
No, I don't know anything about this.
Oh. Yeah, you can dig in, and I don't know if Brains is going to continue doing that for much longer, just because they've run into some issues with that.
Sure.
And everybody else has switched to just a more standard model that's going to keep them from going bankrupt in the end. And they used to argue which one was more fair, which one wasn't. One of the issues with the PPLNS was it was harder to audit. So a lot of people didn't like it because they couldn't guarantee that the pool was being honest all the time.
That's my question too.
I'll ask you
No,
this.
if it's about this, keep on talking.
It's a different question. So Shane's line.
I'll be building an ADU on my property in the next 5 years. What would you recommend I consider in new construction as far as maybe putting something on there that would pump back into the HVAC, or I don't know a lot about it, and I'm just kind of wondering what I should consider as I go into a construction opportunity that I can add mining to.
I mean, the biggest thing, like if you're trying to reuse the heat, right, you just got to decide if you're trying to do it as far as air recirculation or water recirculation. The easiest ones are just doing like in-floor water heating, right? They already built boiler systems, you already use the same pumps, you already use all that. You can build it into your driveway, into your sidewalk, and then when it snows in Colorado, yours is perfectly clear and everybody else's isn't. It's not easy, it's not as simple, like as Coin Heated makes it look on Twitter, like he does a hell of a lot of work to heat swimming pools and all that fun stuff. The biggest thing is just like, depending on how many miners you're putting into a space, if you want to reuse the heat, once you get to a significant amount of miners, it's a lot of heat to be able to dissipate. And in the summertime, you may not be able to dissipate that. So you're going to want to add some sort of dry cooler outside of it to be able to continue to cool down the water before it goes back to loop. Air, if it's not going straight into an air furnace, there's not a whole lot of other uses for hot air as far as that goes. So definitely focus on the immersion side of things. There's a lot of DIY immersion opportunities out there that you can dig into that are fun projects, whether it's as small as a single fish tank or 8-unit tubs and all that fun stuff. Does that answer it well?
Yeah, where do you see that going over like a 20-year span as far as integrating into HVAC systems or integrating it into that? Is that possible?
I think
or no?
there's two options in the future. There's actually companies that do this on a normal server level right now with just general servers. Like banks run a bunch of servers. They do it in other countries more often than not in the US. In which they actually just build the server cases, set it up, and flow it through there just like it's a radiator, and they kick it outside to a dry cooler when it's not being used. There are countries that actually sell heat into like a grid-tied heating system. So they actually have fluid running all over, just like we have power running all over. They heat the water, they send it to homes, they send it to businesses, and they do that in other countries. And I actually talked to someone the other day about that because they're looking to put a Bitcoin mining farm on with their solar farm. To be able to sell the heat and be able to sell the solar to the grid. And they're running economics because over there, power is like 24 cents a kilowatt. It's too expensive. But what they get paid for the heat can offset that significantly because they can put a lot of heat back into the system. I think in the US, like I don't see them building integrated heating into cities anytime soon. It's just,
Denver has a system right now.
Did they use it?
It's Xcel Energy runs it.
Really?
It's like a boiler system. I don't think it's like across the whole city, but like in kind of the dense part, right, maybe around like 16th Street.
That's kind of interesting.
Anywhere you see steam
Do they have a market?
Yeah, they have a steam system. I doubt it. I don't know.
Because the other countries have like a market, just like buying and selling power, they buy and sell heat. But it'd be interesting to talk to the cities and like, hey, let's add some heat to it.
Totally.
Yeah, and so, I mean, maybe new build stuff, maybe integrated in houses. I don't see it going a whole lot. I'm the guy who sits up here and I hate immersion mining. And a few people around here know why I hate immersion mining. So I think it's a fun project. You can offset heating bills at home. I think it's going to be integrated into grow farms, in whether that's pot in Colorado or that's vegetables in Ohio or in wherever, right? I think you're going to see more integration in greenhouses. It can be integrated with air or with water in those situations, depending on the type of greenhouse they're building. If you're using heat for greenhouses, you're probably in a colder climate in the first place. And so you probably don't need to worry about immersion cooling there to be able to cool your miners. You just want to get heat in the building. You can do that with off-the-shelf HVAC systems now that are just dampening and moving the heat around. So I see situations like that where they're needing to heat large open spaces. You put a container that has Bitcoin miners that convert energy to heat like 97% efficiency and just pump that into a greenhouse. Right now, I think in the wintertime, Colorado basically produces no fruits or vegetables. It's too expensive to heat greenhouses here because the cost of natural gas and electricity to heat the greenhouse. So you only ever see Colorado proud during the summer for a few months, and it's gone. All the greenhouses close their doors and then they start again. So they have like a 3-month period of time where they don't do anything. That's a situation where like Colorado, cool. If they're using natural gas to heat, well, I can come in as a Bitcoin miner, make a deal and say, I'm gonna sell you heat and for the same price you're paying for natural gas. What do you think? Now you just offset your power rates at this horrible 12+ cent power rate we have in Colorado thanks to Xcel being a giant monopoly. And that could be some cool use cases, but I don't think we'll see anything large scale like that. I think most of the guys building out giant immersion farms, they're doing it either because it's really hot and they need to cool it. Their CEO thinks there's, the cost of 3x the cost of building the site is worth the potential lower maintenance and the marginal overclock with the same efficiency.
What's like the worst or maybe most common, the terrible stories you've seen, deployments of various sizes?
One, don't build mining farms next to the ocean. 2, you have to have air filtration if you're doing this at any meaningful scale. Even if you're not doing it at a meaningful scale. If you have, I started with like 4 dragon mints in a crawl space, and my wife was going to divorce me. And they ended up in a tough shed in, a business partner's backyard. And we get hummingbird moths sucked through filtration. They just pull a lot of air. And so you have to have air filtration. Don't build them by the ocean. I think everybody builds them wrong the first time. Even guys that are jumping into this and they maybe done one in their backyard or in their garage, and they decide to jump up to that 1+ megawatt scale, and they're going to do it themselves in a building. They build it backwards. They don't account for the amount of heat these things create correctly. Even if they get a good engineer, the engineer hasn't dealt with it in person, and it kind of falls apart. But I've seen everything from being able to pick up a miner and tilt it, and dirt just falls out of it, and you can shake it for a minute and you don't get it all out. And this is stuff coming from China. This is stuff in the U.S. This is just unfiltered farms. They just pull all the dirt in from and you sometimes you'll see a miner, you'll dump it out, and you see the colored dirt, you know which farm it came from. Everywhere in the United States, you figure out where the dirt is different color and you know where it is. The ones by the ocean, I think, struggle. It's just the humidity is just difficult to deal with. And you can get cheap power next to the ocean, and so some people go there and they build farms, and then they realize they can't deal with the humidity like they thought they could. So those are some situations. I've seen entire mining farms built out of wood, and you walk around with a heat gun, and you have 5 megawatts worth of power lines running across wood shelves that are just stacked on top of each other, and you look at the heat going through there. Google what temperature does wood combust at. Those are some fun ones. So at this point I've probably seen it all. I don't know, maybe someone will show me some. What's that?
That's agricultural.
It's agricultural, yeah. But yeah, people in the early days, it was just people me explaining to Tatum how to run a 220. Right? And that's how people did this in the early days. It's I know how to run a 220 and I can wire a fan, and all of a sudden I have a Bitcoin mining farm that wouldn't pass any code in any state in the entire United States. And then, or I ordered this box from China because it only cost me 10 grand, and I plug everything in there, and I didn't know what a torque spec on a bolt was for my switch gear, and now the thing melted down. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I'm not taking any from that section.
People talk about the S9s, S19s, S2000s, whatever they're up to now. Those are all made by Bitmain, is that right?
Yeah, so there's three primary manufacturers of Bitcoin miners. Bitmain is the largest, right? They're the big gorilla in the room. They produce the most miners. All the S series of those. They have some T series as well. They also make altcoin miners. Second largest manufacturer is actually Canaan. They're not as popular in the U.S. because they treated everybody poorly, but they do have this. They do produce and sell the second most miners. What's Miner being the third largest. And then there's a whole bunch of like really small one-offs, like you got Minerva and Inner8 and Strong U and a bunch of these other smaller guys. They use a different foundry. They're SMIC chips, and China foundries don't care about intellectual or any sort of property rights, and so they just give the information away. They clone the miners, send them out. They don't work. There's no support. They break. It's great. There's 4 new ASIC manufacturers or miner manufacturers coming to market. I think 2 of them are pretty public right now. Like they've been to conferences, and you could have ran into them on your own. They're all coming to market with like XP level or better chips out of TSMC, either 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer. I think one of them is actually at 7 nanometer, but they have a better process. So it's pretty exciting to see new manufacturers coming to market with like a real product it's not just some fake, new miner that looks like Mountain Dew cans or something like that some public company bought for some reason, even though everybody thought they were a scam.
What's the nanometer limit? When do the electrons start bridging gaps? Is it 1?
The limit of synchronous computation is 3 nanometers per clock cycle, because that's the distance that light can go. 0.3 billion meters per second.
Of course, Eli had
Yeah, so if you cannot go any faster.
That's hot.
Like 0.2 like nanometer or 2 nanometer, like light cannot travel fast enough for a clock cycle. It doesn't work that way.
So we're almost there.
Yeah,
We're almost there.
shit, you don't got a lot more to go.
Well, Samsung has a 2.5 prototype, but it's not a mining chip yet.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to know what we're talking about, this is a 7 nanometer chip. That's from a J Pro. This is a 5 nanometer chip from an XP. That's an expensive one there.
I've seen 2.
I think there's any opportunity to use the heat in a refrigeration cycle to provide a cooling load instead of a heating load.
So we already do this with like a chiller on natural gas generators, right? Like Trane makes a chiller that takes the heat from the natural gas generator and converts it into, like you convert it to sub-freezing temperatures and fluids and actually use it to cool stuff. You don't see it a whole lot. Like I modeled out a natural gas project using Trane chillers to be able to cool the miners. But it was just better to do like a cogen, and so use the heat to boil water and turn a steam turbine instead. It was more efficient. You got more use out of it. So I don't know if we'll go down that path. I think it's pretty niche, and I think that it's more cost effective just to use the heat to generate more power.
Yeah, interesting. I was thinking like in Europe they don't use air conditioning. It's just too expensive for their electricity costs. I'm just thinking.
Oh, I live in Evergreen. I don't use air conditioning because it's always cold. Yeah, but I mean, there's lots of other ways to take hot stuff and make it cold, and we do this like, just compressing propane, right? You just put it in a really small ring and it gets really cold. So I don't know if someone wanted to build it and try to figure out how to bring something to market that could be usable, there could be a market for it, especially places like that where electricity is expensive. Because then you're making X amount off your mining at the same time cooling your house. Ethan.
All right. I promise I'm going to say something good. I hope this is not too elementary, but so I just learned about immersion miners, and I learned that by keeping them cool, made it so that their terahash would hash higher than their normal terahash would be. Why wouldn't we be hosting in places that are just extremely cold? Like why?
We do. Some of the first large mining farms were in like Iceland, right? So Genesis was a big one that's out there. There's still people that's out there. The best part is they have power that's geothermal. So they have a lot of geothermal power and they have a really cold temperature. And there's a shop 15 minutes from our shop that actually was building containerized mining farms that were actually using the heat to heat a hydroponic farm inside the container at the same time.
Nice.
So we do that. Some of those countries, they just ran out of power, or the power became more expensive because they're like, I'm not giving you free power anymore, I'm gonna charge a little more. And they would just charge what the market would bear because that's how it works. And so a lot of miners left those places. Some places just can't support it, right? So maybe you get up to like northern Alaska, and it just gets to an environment where it's too harsh, it's too far away to have like a large enough mine to make enough money. And then when you get to some of those remote cold locations, outside of places that have geothermal, you don't have access to the power. So now you're like, okay, I gotta get power out here. I'm either building a power plant or I'm dragging power poles a very long distance. Once you get too far of a run, you have a lot of line loss in the power, and so it's kind of an interesting thing. Like Bitcoin's one of the only things that you can just consume power anywhere. So if the power is already there and it's already being wasted, like we could just go use it. Like, so all this Bitcoin mining, the vast majority of that is being used as wasted energy. So it's energy that would otherwise not be consumed. So that's kind of exciting.
So it's a matter of infrastructure mainly, like infrastructure versus cost is like where these good environments are, it's just not inhabitable otherwise, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have three things, right? You have to have power, cooling, and internet.
Wait, I thought it was hamsters.
Hamsters. You gotta cool your hamster. So you got cooling in those remote locations, but then you gotta get your internet and your power out there. And so now you got Starlink, and yes, you can mine on Starlink, but then you still gotta get power to the site.
Hash rate keeps moving up and to the right. It seems like the mega miners are driving a lot of that, and the home miners are kind of just along for the ride as far as the difficulty adjustment is concerned. What are you seeing in the marketplace right now, even in a bear market? It keeps moving it up and to the right, and you see that continuing.
Still profitable, it's gonna keep going up. So that's the biggest thing is like Bitcoin miners are greedy, which is why we're gonna keep the network running forever. Is because there's always gonna be a profit. Bitcoin, the way it works, and talking about the difficulty adjustment, is the more computers that come online, difficulty is going to adjust. You're going to get less reward for the same amount of work put in. And it continues to adjust and kind of try to balance itself all the time. Bitcoin's trying to get to like, a break-even cost of mining. It's always trying to force the miners to not make any profit. And then when you get to that point, there's going to be a few miners that have an edge. Maybe it's because they have cheaper power, maybe it's because they're reusing heat, maybe it's because they have a better chip or a better miner. And then there's going to be the few people that can't handle the market. They're going to go bankrupt, and the guys that are good are going to acquire all their equipment, and then it's going to push them super profitable for a period of time, and it's going to come back in. That's just that perfect market balance. So as long as Bitcoin has a value, that's just going to keep going up. There's no slowing down. Like as a Bitcoin miner, you're like shorting difficulty, which is a horrible idea probably.
Yeah, so going back to T-Bane's concept around like, we're dealing in this very close to like perfect competition type market. Like we're touching on some of the ideas around what makes this market somewhat inefficient, but I guess like, I'm assuming it depends quite a bit on scale in which you're competing in, what areas of inefficiency you'd ultimately be targeting. But it sounds like, there's diseconomies of scale with some amount of, the amount of like megawatts that you're ultimately producing, you're hitting some amount of diseconomies of scale because of like stranded energy sources, and there's a lot of like geographic constraints around things. And then it's also like there's a lot of centralization in the hardware manufacturing. Like out of a lot of those areas, like what are large scale operations really targeting? Like are people trying to like manipulate the supply chains at all in like competitive ways? Like what are kind of the things going on underneath?
I could say I don't think they're manipulating supply chains yet. I think that the manufacturers of miners, even though there's only a few, the bigger bottleneck is there's really only one or two foundries that can make these, really little tiny chips. You got TSMC and Samsung. SMIC was out at 7 nanometer, and there's really no other ones. So that's your biggest bottleneck. And for them, now you're competing against, NVIDIA and anybody else trying to make a cutting edge nanometer chip. The difference is Bitcoin miners, we don't care about the yield, and so we're willing to jump into that process before they get it nailed down. So that's probably the reason you see the same nanometer chip get more efficient until all of a sudden they have to go to the next one. So that's where one of the biggest bottlenecks is actually at the chip manufacturing level. And then it was also pigeonholed to a specific part of the world. Now we're finally getting TSMC and Samsung are building in the US, so at least it'll be geographically better. And so as you walk down the bottlenecks, the next one is just where energy is available. So now this is where it's kind of interesting, because you have these crazy markets like ERCOT where you can have negative energy rates, but at the same time you have $5,000 megawatt hour energy rates, which is crazy. And so they play that balancing act in that game, which just happens to balance the load on the grid. Because it's too expensive to mine, I shut off, everybody else's power prices come down because I'm not buying power. And then you have the guys going after like stranded resources. Like there's thousands of stranded gas wells in Colorado. They're drilled in like the 50s and 70s. They're looking for oil, they found gas, and they just left. And they're not connected to any pipelines, they're just sitting out there. They're capping liabilities, so the landowner or the mineral owner actually has a liability to just fill that thing with concrete. So if you can find those opportunities and it actually produces a fair value amount of gas, well, you can make a deal where like, I'm gonna pay you nothing, and you don't have to worry about the capping liability anymore. Like I'll just sit here and I'll consume all your gas for you, or I'll give you a nominal rate for it, and then you don't have to worry about your liability. So now you have essentially, super cheap power that is in the middle of nowhere, that's not going to be messed with by anybody because no one out there cares. Versus mega farms that are now negotiating at the very large scale with very large utilities, very large markets, and competing for that lowest power rate. But ultimately, Bitcoin miners are going to go where the power is cheap in the end. So right now, we have a large concentration in the US. Before that was China. Like Chinese miners would actually, like before some of the earlier bans, Chinese miners would, they tell the government, oh, we're just cloud services, right? And the government didn't, and so they got subsidies to mine in China that drove their power prices way below. And then they're like, you're mining Bitcoin, slap on the wrist, it's banned, now you gotta pay full prices. And then, they just, they banned it a bunch of times. Finally, they really banned it, everybody moved because the US is there. Now we're looking at the Middle East and Africa and Central America, and people are starting to get out of here because the power prices came up during the UK war, knocked a couple people out of the game. It's, there's not a whole lot of low-hanging fruit. You got to build substations, you got to build infrastructure. It's, it's changing. So we'll see diversification out of the United States already much quicker as we go.
Is there much overlap with the data center industry and the Bitcoin mining industry?
Not really. The data center industry is like, there's a data center, and then Bitcoin mining farm is like a chicken coop. So like a tier 1 through 2, 3 data center, they have like redundant energy, they have air filtration, they have backup power, multiple backup power sources. They're trying to achieve super high uptimes. Like if Google's servers shut down, a lot of people are upset. If Amazon's servers shut down, a lot of people are upset. So they have 99.59 uptime. Bitcoin mining is literally a chicken coop, made out of shipping containers or steel buildings. Like even the nicest ones, I've seen nicer chicken coops. So these giant cathedral buildings with like these great filter walls and fan walls and all this great stuff. Like you can see them in Riot and Core and everywhere else. It's the most basic, like you push air in one side, it goes out the other side. So it's not even in the same realm. But it does create a unique opportunity we've been talking about a lot. Is like Bitcoin mining can be intermittent. It doesn't matter if Riot turns off because ERCOT shuts down. It doesn't matter if, all of the United States Bitcoin mining shuts off tomorrow. It doesn't kill Bitcoin. No customer is harmed. You guys might have some slow transaction fees for a day or two if it stays off for a while. So we're intermittent, which makes us a little bit different. And there's other workloads that can be intermittent, like AI model training. So now we're looking at these guys that, hey, you were running GPU miners mining, whatever shitcoin, converting it to Bitcoin. Maybe we can use those types of things. We'll put it in a Bitcoin mining farm model because we can drive down the cost of our data center. We can drive down the cost of our power by being intermittent and serving the grid and using those services. So now what are other workloads that don't need that high uptime that we can move into a data center and kind of bring the two closer together? So some miners are looking at that. I don't know. Voltage.
So do all miners that you can buy, like with the stock firmware, can you overclock them and underclock them? And so if the answer is no, which miners support custom firmware that you can change the hash rate?
Most miners now on stock firmware have like a low power mode, a normal mode, and a like high hash rate mode, but it's really worthless. So almost none of them have that out of the box that's any good. you usually want to go to a custom firmware. So you got Brains, you got Vanish, you got Chipless, you got Luxos now, and there's a few more coming out. All those guys charge a dev fee. There are control board manufacturers like Brains announced their control board. You have Epic with their control board. Swap out your control board, no dev fee, and you can do all that fun tuning stuff that you want. I hope that answers it.
Do control boards control all of the miners?
Control board is just it's the computer that controls the hash cards. So the miner is, have all those little chips on them, and those are laid out into boards. The boards are given power, and the control board just is able to tell the chip, run at this clock rate, turn on, turn off, turn up, turn down. They're pretty basic, pretty dumb. Used to be ran on Raspberry Pis back in the day. Now they run off these little hash boards. They all run off a very kind of basic, microcontrol process. The actual cost of that board is really cheap. And the only one that's unique is the Canaan boards, because they actually build an AI chip, and that AI chip runs their miners, and that's why there's no third-party firmware for it.
Two more questions, maybe.
Okay.
So two things. I appreciate that you moved from altcoins to shitcoins throughout your Q&A, in your description of them. Why would a miner sell their hash rate? I was recently thrown into a service in which I effectively paid $1 to receive $10 worth of hash. What is the incentive for a miner to do that?
Depends on my cost of power, right? So in the end, the miner's greedy, and if I can sell you hash rate for more than I could mine my own Bitcoin for, I'm going to sell you hash rate and make more money and use that to buy Bitcoin. If you'd like to buy some hash rate, let me know.
So are you seeing this, or when do you expect to see, like, Bitcoin miners are helping stabilize energy grids, but, if they're still, even if like the Bitcoin miners power off when energy demand is high, but the energy costs are still very high because there's just not enough energy available, when do you expect to see some positive feedback in terms of infrastructure development where municipalities are starting to build more infrastructure because they realize that potential? Is that happening, or do you expect that?
It's when they stop thinking renewable energy sources are useful. So, traditionally, to solve that problem, we'd put in natural gas peaker power plants. They're called peaker units, right? Of various sizes and scales. And essentially, we could turn them on at various speeds and, whatever. We'd set up these peaker plants. So as the grid became, moving up there, becoming unstable because the load was so high, we just kick on a couple natural gas plants. It would handle the load, and then we'd shut those off. And those guys are actually paid, to reserve their ability to turn on and off. So those natural gas peakers exist all over the United States, basically people don't like burning natural gas anymore because they still think it's like burning coal for some reason, even though it's exponentially better. And they stopped kind of developing and improving that because they're like, hey, let's have solar and wind and batteries, and so our government incentivized that through tax structures. And because it's more tax efficient to go build a solar farm or go build a wind farm that is an intermittent energy source that is not on demand when I need it to, that's what's being built in place instead of natural gas peakers. We are seeing more and more battery generation, but batteries are extremely expensive, except you get these great tax subsidies, and they're not very good yet. Like, they're just kind of bad at what they do from an economic standpoint, right? And a lot of people are taking advantage of batteries. They do like 2-hour batteries, so maybe like, X amount of megawatt hours of a battery. They charge it, when the energy's not being used at a low price. They discharge it when the energy's high. And in the middle of the day, they're just not doing it. They're just holding the energy. Solar produces energy in the middle of the day when lots of people aren't using it. Wind sometimes blows, sometimes doesn't. And it just causes a mess. And that's the only reason why intermittent loads like Bitcoin mining or even other manufacturing loads can take advantage of these markets, is because these intermittent sources are giving power when sometimes we need it, sometimes we don't. The actual solution that we have today would be like, hey, let's build a whole bunch of baseload nuclear and a whole bunch of natural gas peakers, and we'd have a great amount of relatively clean energy that we can turn on the lights whenever we want, instead of building expensive solar panels and wind that's completely intermittent. My personal opinion, I don't know if everybody shares that. But hey, as long as those renewable guys are building and getting tax credits to do it, I'll buy their energy on the other side because they can't sell it to anybody else. So, Cool. I got all the questions that were good for tonight, but I'll be over there too. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit from the Ask Me Anything. So I used to do a lot of this on like Twitter and Clubhouse and all that back in the day. So I haven't done anything like this in a while. So I appreciate you guys very much for asking questions. Thank you guys.